The police said my son's fingerprints matched at a crime scene today. He died in 2020. Detective Angela Reyes called at 2:14 in the afternoon while I was restocking shelves at the hardware store where I'd worked for 18 years. Mr. Brennan, this is Detective Reyes with the Metro Police Department. We need you to come to the station immediately. Your son's fingerprints were found at a homicide scene last night. I nearly dropped the box of screws I was holding. My son Ethan had been dead for 4 years. I'd identified his body myself after the overdose that killed him in our bathroom. I'd held his cold hand at the morgue, seen the needle marks on his arms, signed the papers that confirmed he was gone. The funeral had been small, because most of his friends had either died or disappeared into addiction. His ashes sat in an urn on my mantel at home. There's been a mistake, I said, my voice barely steady. Ethan died in 2020. Drug overdose. I have the death certificate. Detective Reyes went silent for several seconds. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted from professional to cautious. Mr. Brennan, we ran the prints through IAFIS 3 times. They match your son's prints from his 2019 arrest for possession. The match probability is 99.97%. We need you to come in and help us understand what's happening here. I told my manager I had a family emergency and drove to the police station with my hands shaking on the wheel. 4 years of grief had settled into a dull ache I'd learned to carry. Now that wound was ripping open again, but twisted into something I couldn't comprehend. Detective Reyes met me in the lobby. She was younger than I expected, maybe 35, with sharp eyes that studied me carefully as we shook hands. She led me to an interview room that smelled of stale coffee and fear. Another detective joined us, an older man named Frank Colby, who looked tired in a way that went beyond lack of sleep. Mr. Brennan, Reyes began, pulling out a folder. Last night, a man named Gerald Voss was murdered in his home on Maple Street, shot twice in the chest. We found multiple sets of fingerprints at the scene. One set belongs to your son. She slid a photograph across the table. Gerald Voss was maybe 60, gray-haired, ordinary-looking. I'd never seen him before in my life. I don't know this man, I said, and my son is dead, has been for 4 years. Colby leaned forward. Walk us through it. When did Ethan die? What were the circumstances? I recited the story I'd told myself 1,000 times. March 15th, 2020. I'd come home from work and found Ethan unconscious in the bathroom, needle still in his arm. I'd called 911, but the paramedics said he'd been gone for hours. The medical examiner ruled it an accidental overdose, fentanyl-laced heroin. He was 23 years old. Reyes took notes while I spoke, but her expression remained skeptical. Did you see the body after the autopsy? She asked. I nodded. At the funeral home, Carlson and Sons on 5th Street. They prepared him for cremation. She exchanged a glance with Colby. Mr. Brennan, we're going to need documentation. Death certificate, autopsy report, anything you have, because those fingerprints are fresh. They were left sometime between 10 p.m. and midnight last night. The room tilted. Fresh fingerprints. Left last night. By a son who'd been dead for 4 years. My mind couldn't process the contradiction. This is impossible, I whispered. Colby's expression softened slightly. We understand this is distressing, but we need to explore every possibility. Is there any chance Ethan's death was misidentified? That someone else died and was cremated in his place? The suggestion felt obscene. I saw my son. I held his hand. I knew his face, his tattoos, his scars. It was Ethan. But even as I said it, doubt crept in. The body had been cold, the face slack and unfamiliar in death. Had I been too destroyed by grief to look closely? Had I wanted so badly for the nightmare to end that I'd accepted what they told me without question? Reyes pulled out another photograph. These are the fingerprints from the crime scene, and these are Ethan's prints from his 2019 arrest. They're identical. I stared at the whorls and loops, the patterns that were supposedly unique to every human being. They looked the same to my untrained eye, but I couldn't trust my perception anymore. Nothing felt real. What if someone faked his death? I asked. What if Ethan is alive somewhere? Colby shook his head. That would require falsifying medical examiner reports, death certificates, cremation documents, multiple felonies involving multiple officials. It's possible, but highly unlikely. He paused. Unless Ethan had a reason to disappear. Was he in trouble? Did he owe money to dangerous people? Was he involved in anything that would make him want to fake his death? Ethan had been an addict, yes. He'd stolen from me, lied to me, broken my heart 100 times. But he wasn't a criminal mastermind capable of staging his own death. He was a scared kid who couldn't stop using, who hated himself for what the drugs had made him become. He was trying to get clean, I said. He'd been in rehab twice. The second time seemed to be working. Then he relapsed and it killed him. Reyes made a note. We'll need to pull the full case file from 2020. Medical examiner records, police report, funeral home documentation. In the meantime, do you have any recent photos of Ethan? Something clear that shows his face? I pulled out my phone with trembling hands and scrolled to the last photo I had of him, taken 3 weeks before he died. He was smiling, but his eyes looked hollow. I showed it to both detectives. Colby studied the image carefully. We're going to run this through facial recognition against recent surveillance footage. If Ethan is alive, if he's been moving around the city, cameras might have caught him. He stood up. Mr. Brennan, I need you to understand something. A man is dead. Gerald Voss had a wife and 2 adult children. If your son is alive and involved in this murder, we will find him and prosecute him to the full extent of the law. The words hit me hard. I'd spent 4 years mourning Ethan, romanticizing his memory, forgiving his flaws. Now I had to consider that he might be alive and that he might be a murderer. The 2 possibilities were both impossible and both devastating. I'll cooperate fully, I said. Whatever you need. Reyes handed me her card. Don't leave town. We'll be in touch soon. And Mr. Brennan, if Ethan contacts you, you need to call us immediately. Don't try to protect him. Don't help him run. That would make you an accessory. I drove home in a fog. The house felt different now, contaminated by impossible questions. The urn on the mantel suddenly looked sinister. What if those weren't Ethan's ashes? What if I'd been living with a stranger's remains for 4 years? I pulled out the folder I'd kept with all of Ethan's death paperwork. Death certificate signed by Dr. Raymond Pierce, medical examiner. Cremation authorization from Carlson and Sons Funeral Home. Police report from the officers who responded to my 911 call. Everything looked official and legitimate. But if Ethan's fingerprints were at a murder scene last night, then every piece of paper in this folder was a lie. I called Carlson and Sons. The woman who answered said the funeral director who'd handled Ethan's arrangements, Donald Carlson, had retired in 2022. She gave me his personal number. I called immediately. Carlson answered on the 3rd ring, his voice rough with age. Mr. Brennan, I remember you, he said when I identified myself. Your son, Ethan. I'm so sorry for your loss. I explained about the fingerprints, about the police investigation. Carlson was silent for a long moment. That's impossible, he finally said. I handled everything personally. I picked up Ethan's body from the medical examiner's office. I prepared him for cremation. I witnessed the cremation process. Those are his ashes. His certainty should have been reassuring, but something in his tone felt wrong, defensive rather than confused. Did anyone else have access to the body? I asked. Could there have been a mix-up? Carlson hesitated. No mix-up. But I'll tell you something I probably shouldn't. 2 days after I picked up your son's body, 2 men came to the funeral home asking questions. They weren't police, weren't family. They wanted to know about Ethan's body, about the cremation timeline, about whether anyone had viewed him. I told them to leave. They made me nervous. My heart pounded. What did they look like? Carlson described them. One tall and thin, one shorter and muscular. Both wore suits. Both had military-style haircuts. They gave me a card, but I threw it away. They said they were from some federal agency I'd never heard of. Something about asset recovery. I thought they were collection agents, that maybe your son owed money somewhere. Asset recovery. Federal agency. The pieces weren't forming a picture yet, but they were accumulating. I thanked Carlson and hung up. My phone rang immediately. Detective Reyes, we pulled the medical examiner's file on your son. Dr. Raymond Pierce signed off on the cause of death, but there's a problem. Dr. Pierce was suspended 6 months later for irregularities in his autopsy procedures. An internal investigation found he'd been falsifying reports, accepting bribes to misclassified deaths. He lost his license in 2021. The ground kept shifting under me. What are you saying? Reyes spoke carefully. I'm saying it's possible your son's death was misreported, that maybe the body you buried wasn't Ethan, or maybe there was no body at all. We're getting a court order to exhume the cremated remains and test them for DNA. I sat down hard on my couch. DNA testing of 4-year-old ashes. It felt surreal. How long will that take? I asked. The exhumation can happen tomorrow. Results in about a week. She paused. Mr. Brennan, we also ran that photo you gave us through facial recognition. We got a hit on surveillance footage from 3 nights ago at a gas station on the east side. The man in the footage matches your son's facial structure. Same height, same build. We're trying to get better quality images now. 3 nights ago. Ethan, or someone who looked exactly like him, buying gas across town while I was home watching television and missing my dead son. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Send me the footage, I said. I need to see it. Reyes hesitated. That's not standard procedure. My voice broke. My son is either dead, and someone is using his fingerprints somehow, or he's alive and has been letting me grieve him for 4 years. Either way, I need to know the truth. Please. She agreed to email me a clip. I waited by my computer, hands shaking. The email arrived 15 minutes later. I clicked the video file. The footage was grainy, black and white, shot from a high angle at a gas station at night. A man in a baseball cap and jacket was pumping gas. He turned toward the camera for just a moment. My breath stopped. It was Ethan. Older, thinner, harder around the edges. But unmistakably, my son. Alive, moving, breathing. 4 years after I'd watched them lower his urn into the ground. I watched the clip 20 times, pausing on the moment his face was visible. The shape of his jaw, the set of his shoulders, the way he moved. Every detail screamed Ethan, but it couldn't be. Death wasn't reversible. Cremation wasn't fakeable. The logical impossibility crashed against the visual evidence until my mind felt fractured. I called Reyes back. It's him. That's my son. She sighed. Then we need to find him. Does he have any places he might go? Old friends? Favorite locations? Anywhere he felt safe? I thought about Ethan's life before drugs had consumed it. He'd loved the state park north of the city, spent hours hiking the trails. He'd had a girlfriend named Sophie who'd left him when the addiction got bad. He'd worked at an auto shop before getting fired for stealing. Small pieces of a life that had ended or supposedly ended 4 years ago. I gave Reyes everything I could remember. She promised to follow up on every lead. After we hung up, I sat alone in my living room staring at the urn that might not contain my son. Questions multiplied until they were suffocating. If Ethan was alive, why had he faked his death? Who were the two men who visited the funeral home? What was asset recovery? Why would Ethan's fingerprints be at a murder scene? I pulled out my laptop and searched for Gerald Voss, the murder victim. His obituary was already online. Survived by his wife Margaret and children David and Jennifer. Worked for 30 years as an accountant at a firm downtown. No obvious connection to Ethan or anything that would explain why my son would want him dead. I dug deeper. Social media profiles, public records, anything I could find. Gerald Voss lived a quiet, ordinary life. He coached Little League. He volunteered at his church. He had no criminal record, no scandals, no visible enemies, which made his murder even more inexplicable. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Dad, don't trust the police. I didn't kill anyone. Meet me at the old mill tomorrow at noon. Come alone, delete this message. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. Ethan, alive, texting me. The impossibility of it warred with the overwhelming relief flooding through me. My son wasn't dead. 4 years of grief had been based on a lie. But what kind of nightmare had replaced that grief? I should have called Detective Reyes immediately. She'd been explicit about reporting any contact. But this was my son. If he was alive, I needed to see him, to understand what had happened before the police got involved. I deleted the message as instructed and tried to sleep, but couldn't. The night dragged past in a haze of questions and desperate hope. Morning came too slowly. I called in sick to work, then drove to the old mill on the outskirts of town. The building had been abandoned for a decade, a relic of the city's industrial past. I'd brought Ethan here once when he was 12 to look at the rusted machinery and talk about how things change. He'd been fascinated by the decay, by the way nature was reclaiming what humans had built. I parked in the empty lot and walked to the main entrance. The door was unlocked. Inside, light filtered through broken windows, illuminating dust and debris. Dad! The voice came from the shadows. Ethan stepped into view. He looked older, haunted, thin in a way that suggested recent stress rather than malnutrition. But he was solid, real, breathing. My son, alive. I wanted to run to him, to hold him, to verify his physical existence. But I stayed frozen. You're alive, I said stupidly. Ethan nodded. I'm sorry. For everything. For the pain I've caused you. But I didn't have a choice. His voice was different now. Harder, more careful. The voice of someone who'd learned not to trust anything. Explain, I said. Explain why I've been mourning you for 4 years. Explain why your fingerprints are at a murder scene. Explain why federal agents were asking questions at the funeral home. Explain everything. Ethan looked toward the door nervously. We don't have much time. They're probably following you. My anger flared. Who's following me? Who are they? Ethan, what the hell is going on? He took a breath. In 2019, I was using heavily. You know that part. What you don't know is who my dealer was. Gerald Voss. The name hit me hard. The murder victim. Voss was a dealer? Ethan shook his head. Not exactly. He was a middleman for something bigger. He worked for an organization that used drug trafficking to fund black operations. Illegal operations. I found out by accident. I was at his house picking up, Ethan continued. He was on the phone talking to someone about a shipment. Not drugs, weapons, military-grade hardware. He mentioned names, places, operations that sounded like something out of a spy movie. I was too high to understand what I was hearing, but I recorded it on my phone. Thought maybe I could use it as leverage if I ever needed to. He laughed bitterly. 2 days later, Voss's people came after me. They wanted the recording. They wanted me dead. I ran to the police, but they told me they couldn't help. Said I was a junkie with no credibility. Said I'd probably imagined the whole thing. The story was insane, but Ethan's fear was genuine. Real terror lived in his eyes. So you faked your death, I said. Ethan nodded. Voss's organization has connections everywhere. Police, medical examiners, funeral homes. They offered me a deal. They'd make me disappear, give me a new identity, protect me from the people who wanted me dead. In exchange, I had to give them the recording and stay hidden forever. I had to let everyone think I was dead. He met my eyes, including you, especially you. They said if you knew I was alive, you'd be in danger, that they'd have to eliminate the risk. The pieces clicked together with horrible clarity. The corrupt medical examiner who signed the false death certificate. The funeral director who cremated someone else's body, or maybe no body at all. The federal agents asking questions, making sure the cover story held. What recording? I asked. Do you still have it? Ethan shook his head. I gave it to them. That was the deal. But I made a copy first. Hid it where they'd never find it. Insurance in case they decided to kill me anyway. He pulled out a USB drive from his pocket. This is it. Conversations between Voss and someone called the administrator. They're discussing weapon sales to foreign militants. Money laundering through government contracts, murders of people who found out too much. It's all here. I stared at the small piece of plastic that had apparently cost my son his life, or at least his identity. Why surface now? Why did you contact me after 4 years? Ethan's expression hardened. Because they broke the deal. Last week, I found out they're planning to kill everyone who knows about the operation, including me. They killed Voss 2 nights ago to tie up loose ends. He knew too much, had gotten careless. I was there, Dad. I went to his house to warn him. I knew they were coming for him, but I got there too late. He was already dead. I touched things in the house trying to find evidence, trying to understand how deep this went. That's how my fingerprints ended up at the scene. He looked desperate. I didn't kill him, but the organization is setting me up for it. They want me arrested and convicted so I disappear into the prison system. And then I'll die in some convenient accident, and everyone who knows about the operation will be gone. The scale of conspiracy he was describing seemed impossible, but the evidence supported it. The fake death, the corrupt officials, the murder, the fingerprints. We need to go to the FBI, I said, above local police, federal investigation. Ethan laughed harshly. The organization has people in federal agencies too. That's how they operate. They're embedded everywhere. Going to law enforcement is suicide. He handed me the USB drive. I need you to take this, make copies, send them to journalists, to congressmen, to anyone who might listen. If something happens to me, this is the only evidence that exists. I took the drive with shaking hands. What are you going to do? Ethan started backing toward a rear exit. I'm going to disappear again. For real this time, but I needed you to know the truth. I needed you to know I didn't abandon you by choice. His voice cracked. I'm sorry I let you grieve me. I'm sorry for all of it. Wait, I said, but he was already moving toward the door. Ethan, don't run. We can fight this together. He shook his head. If they catch me, I'm dead. If they catch you with that drive, you're dead too. Hide it. Use it. But don't try to find me. It's safer for both of us. He paused at the exit. I love you, Dad. I always did. Then he was gone, melting into the daylight outside. I stood alone in the ruined mill, holding evidence of a conspiracy that had stolen my son twice. The weight of it was crushing. But beneath the fear and confusion, anger was building. These people had terrorized Ethan, corrupted officials, murdered to protect their secrets. They'd made me bury an empty urn and mourn for 4 years. They'd stolen my son's life and my peace of mind. Someone had to pay for that. I drove home carefully, watching for any sign of surveillance, parked in my garage, and went inside with the USB drive hidden in my pocket. I needed to verify Ethan's story before making any moves. I plugged the drive into my laptop, 2 audio files and a document folder. I clicked the first audio file. Voices filled my speakers. Gerald Voss and another man discussing a weapons shipment. Specific details about quantities, prices, delivery dates. The conversation was calm, businesslike, discussing murder tools with the same tone you'd use for ordering office supplies. The second file was similar. Voss and the same man, who he called administrator, talking about eliminating someone who'd gotten too curious, arranging what they called a cleanup operation. The document folder contained financial records, bank transactions, wire transfers, coded ledgers, money moving through shell companies, government contracts that didn't seem to deliver any services, payments to individuals with redacted names. The scale was massive. Millions of dollars over several years. If this evidence was legitimate, it exposed a criminal network operating inside government structures. But who could I trust with it? Ethan was right that going to local police was dangerous. They'd already proven compromised. Federal agencies were questionable. I needed someone outside the system. I thought about my sister Karen, a lawyer in the state capitol. She had connections to investigative journalists, to politicians who'd built careers on exposing corruption. I called her. Karen, I need your help. Something impossible has happened. I explained everything. Ethan's supposed death, the fingerprints, the meeting at the mill, the USB drive. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. David, this is insane. You're telling me Ethan faked his death 4 years ago because he stumbled onto some vast conspiracy? I could hear the skepticism in her voice. I have evidence, I said. Audio recordings, financial documents. It's real, Karen, and people are dying to keep it secret. She sighed. Okay, email me everything. I know a reporter at the state newspaper who specializes in corruption cases. If the evidence is solid, he'll know what to do with it. But David, you need to be careful. If this organization is as dangerous as Ethan says, you're in serious risk. I made multiple copies of the USB drive, hid them in different locations, then emailed the files to Karen. After I sent them, I sat staring at my computer screen, wondering if I'd just signed my death warrant. My phone rang. Detective Reyes. Mr. Brennan, we need you to come to the station. Now. Her tone was sharp, official. I tried to keep my voice steady. Is this about Ethan? She didn't answer directly. Just come in. We have new information. I drove to the police station with my heart pounding. Had they found Ethan? Did they know about the meeting at the mill? Was I about to be arrested for obstruction? Reyes met me at the entrance and led me to the same interview room as before. Colby was there, along with 2 other men in suits I didn't recognize. Mr. Brennan, these are Special Agents Thornton and Hayes from the FBI, Reyes said. They have questions about your son. Thornton was the tall, thin one. Hayes was shorter, muscular. Both had military-style haircuts. The description matched what Carlson had told me about the men who visited the funeral home. My blood turned cold. These were the people Ethan had warned me about, the organization's embedded agents. Mr. Brennan, Thornton said smoothly, we understand you met with your son this morning at the old mill on Route 9. We need to know what he told you and what he gave you. They'd been following me, watching. They knew everything. I forced my expression to stay neutral. I don't know what you're talking about. My son died 4 years ago. Hayes leaned forward aggressively. Don't lie to us. We have surveillance footage of your car at the mill. We have proof you were in contact with Ethan. Obstructing a federal investigation is a serious crime. Reyes looked confused, glancing between the FBI agents and me. She hadn't known about the meeting. The agents hadn't told local police. They were running their own operation. I want a lawyer, I said. Thornton smiled coldly. You're not under arrest, Mr. Brennan. We're just having a conversation. But I'll be direct. Your son stole classified information related to national security operations. He's committed treason. If you're helping him, you're guilty of the same crime. Life in prison, no possibility of parole. The threat was clear. Give up Ethan and the evidence, or lose everything. Ethan told me he witnessed Gerald Voss discussing illegal weapons trafficking, I said carefully. He said Voss was murdered because he knew too much. That doesn't sound like national security. That sounds like criminal conspiracy. Hayes's jaw tightened. You don't understand the situation. This is classified. We can't discuss operational details with civilians. Detective Colby cleared his throat. Wait a minute. Are you saying Gerald Voss was involved in federal operations? Because the evidence at his murder scene suggests organized crime, not government work. Thornton shot him an annoyed look. Detective, this case is now under federal jurisdiction. Local police involvement is no longer required. Reyes bristled. This is our investigation. We found the fingerprints. We contacted Mr. Brennan. Hayes stood up. Not anymore. As of now, this is a federal matter. You're both dismissed. Colby and Reyes exchanged glances, but didn't move. With all due respect, Reyes said, we need documentation of jurisdictional transfer. Official paperwork transferring the case to federal authority. Thornton's expression hardened. Detective, you're interfering with national security operations. That's a federal offense. I suggest you leave before this becomes a problem for your career. The naked threat hung in the air. Reyes looked at me, then at the agents. She seemed to be calculating something. Finally, she stood. Come on, Frank, let's go. They left the room, closing the door behind them. I was alone with Thornton and Hayes. Smart woman, Thornton said. Now, Mr. Brennan, where's the evidence your son gave you? I met his eyes. I don't have any evidence. Ethan told me his story, then left. That's all. Hayes pulled out his phone and showed me a photo. It was me at my computer, visible through my window, plugging in the USB drive. They'd been watching my house. We can get a search warrant and tear your house apart, Hayes said. Or you can save us all time and hand it over now. I had copies hidden, but they'd find the original if they searched. I needed time to think, to plan. It's at my house, in my desk drawer. Thornton smiled. Excellent. We'll all take a ride together. They drove me home in an unmarked car. Thornton at the wheel, Hayes in the back seat beside me. No one spoke. At my house, they came inside and waited while I retrieved the USB drive from my desk. Thornton took it, examined it, then pocketed it. You've done the right thing, he said. Your son committed crimes, but you don't have to go down with him. What happens now? I asked. We find Ethan and deal with him appropriately, Hayes said. The phrase, deal with him appropriately, sounded like a death sentence. He didn't kill Voss, I said. He told me he was trying to warn him. Thornton shrugged. That's for the courts to decide. If he's innocent, he'll have his day in court. But his tone suggested there would be no court, no trial, just a quiet elimination of a problem that knew too much. They left after warning me not to discuss the case with anyone. I watched from my window as their car disappeared down the street. Then I pulled out one of the backup USB drives I'd hidden in the garage and called Karen. They came for the evidence, FBI agents. Corrupt ones, I think. Did you send the files to your journalist friend? I did, Karen said. He's reviewing them now. He thinks this is huge, David. If it's legitimate, this could bring down a whole network. I told her about the FBI agents, about their threats, about how they'd known I met Ethan. They're watching me. They're going to find Ethan and kill him. We need to move fast. Karen's voice was grim. The reporter is meeting with his editor tonight. They'll decide whether to publish. But David, if these people are as connected as Ethan says, publishing might not be enough. They'll deny everything, discredit the evidence, make you and Ethan look crazy. She was right. I needed more than just the recordings. I needed proof of the conspiracy itself, evidence that would force official investigations that couldn't be buried. I thought about Detective Reyes and how she'd reacted when the FBI agents tried to take over her case. She'd seemed suspicious of them, resistant to their authority. Maybe she was someone I could trust. I called her cell phone. She answered immediately. Mr. Brennan, what the hell is going on? Those FBI agents had no proper credentials, no transfer paperwork. They basically threatened us and took over our investigation. Relief flooded through me. She'd noticed the same red flags I had. They're not legitimate FBI, I said. At least, they're not investigating a crime. They're covering one up. Can you meet me? I have information about Gerald Voss's murder. She agreed to meet at a diner across town in 1 hour. I drove carefully, checking for surveillance. The diner was half empty. Reyes was in a back booth with Colby beside her. I sat down and pulled out the backup USB drive. Everything you need to know is on here. Audio recordings of Gerald Voss discussing illegal weapons trafficking. Financial records showing money laundering through government contracts. Evidence of a criminal organization operating inside federal agencies. Colby took the drive. Where did you get this? I explained everything. Ethan's fake death, the meeting at the mill, the conspiracy to silence anyone who knew about the operation. Both detectives listened with increasingly disturbed expressions. If this is real, Reyes said slowly, we're talking about corruption at the highest levels. We can't investigate this alone. We need help from outside agencies. Colby nodded. I know someone at the state attorney general's office. Someone who's made a career of going after dirty cops and corrupt officials. If anyone can handle this, it's him. They made calls while I sat in the booth drinking coffee that tasted like mud. My phone buzzed with a text from Karen. Reporter is publishing tomorrow morning. Full expose on front page. Are you safe? I texted back that I was with police I thought I could trust. The next 12 hours passed in a blur of activity. The state attorney general opened an emergency investigation. Colby and Reyes coordinated with investigators from the AG's office. I gave my statement 3 times to different officials. The audio recordings were verified as authentic. The financial records were traced to real accounts, real transactions. By midnight, search warrants had been issued. By 2 a.m., arrests were being made. But Thornton and Hayes had disappeared. Warning must have reached them that their cover was blown. They'd vanished into whatever network protected them. The newspaper story broke at 6 a.m. Front page headline, Federal Officials Implicated in Weapons Trafficking Scheme. The article detailed everything. Voss's role as middleman. The organization's use of government contracts to launder money. The fake death of a witness who'd discovered the truth. The murder of Voss when he became a liability. Public reaction was immediate and explosive. By noon, federal officials were holding press conferences. The FBI director announced an internal investigation. Congress scheduled emergency hearings. But I didn't care about any of that. I cared about finding Ethan before the organization did. He was still out there, still in danger, still living as a ghost, because he'd stumbled onto the wrong truth at the wrong time. Detective Reyes called me on the 3rd day after the story broke. We found your son. He's safe, in protective custody, under the state AG's supervision. Relief nearly knocked me over. Can I see him? She gave me an address. A safe house on the outskirts of the city, guarded by state troopers. I drove there with my heart pounding. They let me through after checking my ID. Ethan was in the living room, looking exhausted but alive. When he saw me, his face crumpled. Dad. I hugged him for the first time in 4 years. He felt real, solid, warm. My son. Alive. Not dead. Never dead. It's over, I told him. The story's out. They can't silence you anymore. Ethan shook his head. It's not over. The people at the top, the administrator, they're still out there. We got the middlemen, but not the real power. He was probably right. Organizations with this kind of reach didn't collapse from one newspaper article, but something fundamental had shifted. The conspiracy was exposed. The public was watching. Officials who might have been compromised were now under scrutiny. You're alive, I said. That's what matters. Everything else we can figure out. Ethan smiled weakly. I'm sorry for everything. For the years you spent grieving. For the pain I caused. I shook my head. You survived. You protected me. You did what you had to do. We talked for hours. He told me about the 4 years living in hiding, always looking over his shoulder, never able to contact anyone from his old life. The loneliness had been crushing, the fear constant, but he'd endured because he had no choice. The state attorney general's investigation continued for months. More arrests were made. Financial accounts were frozen. Shell companies were exposed. But the deeper the investigation went, the more obvious it became that key figures had escaped. The administrator was never identified. The highest levels of the organization remained protected by layers of compartmentalization and plausible deniability. Still, the operation was crippled. The weapons trafficking stopped. The money laundering networks were dismantled, and Ethan was granted immunity in exchange for his testimony. He'd never be prosecuted for his role, however unwitting, in the conspiracy. The fake death was attributed to coercion and witness protection gone wrong. Officials who'd helped fake his death were prosecuted. The medical examiner lost his license permanently. The funeral director faced fraud charges. 6 months after the story broke, Ethan moved into an apartment across town. He was still in the witness protection program, still using a new identity for safety, but he could resume something approximating normal life. We had dinner every week. Slowly, carefully, we rebuilt the relationship that had been shattered by addiction and then stolen by conspiracy. He started attending NA meetings, working through the trauma of 4 years in hiding. He got a job at a community center helping other former addicts. His life would never be completely normal. The threat from the organization's remnants still existed. He'd always be looking over his shoulder, but he was alive. He was free. and he was my son. One evening over dinner, he asked me about the urn on my mantel. Whose ashes are those? I'd had them tested. They were human remains, but not Ethan's. Some unknown person whose body had been cremated in place of my son's. I don't know, I told him. I buried them properly, gave them the dignity they deserved. It seemed like the least I could do. The fingerprints at the crime scene had been Ethan's final insurance policy, though he hadn't intended it that way. By touching things in Voss's house, he'd created evidence that would eventually force the truth into the open. Sometimes accidents create the leverage that deliberate plans can't. Sometimes a mistake becomes the key that unlocks everything. 3 years after the conspiracy broke, I stood at a real grave with Ethan beside me. We were burying the unknown person whose ashes I'd carried home 4 years ago, giving them a name on the headstone, Unknown Soul, honored in death. It felt right. This person, whoever they'd been, had become an unwitting part of a conspiracy that stole identities and destroyed families. They deserved recognition, even if we'd never know their name. Ethan placed flowers on the grave, and we stood in silence. My son was alive. The truth had surfaced. Justice, incomplete but real, had been served. The organization that had stolen his life was broken, if not destroyed. And every week, we had dinner together, rebuilding what had been lost, grateful for every ordinary moment. The impossible had become possible. Death had been reversible, but only because it had never truly happened. The fingerprints at a crime scene had told a story of resurrection and justice. And sometimes, that's enough. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.